Hello, welcome to the latest We Are Sunderland briefing with myself, Dom Short, and Scott Wilson, in association with our partners at We Are Sunderland, the Fans Museum, and Cospex Opticians. Thanks to those for their ongoing support, and thanks to you for watching, listening, subscribing, getting in touch. If you haven't subscribed yet to the YouTube channel, then just tap that button below. Now, we're over 1,000 now, which is what we were aiming for a while, which is great news. Not so great news was dropping points at home to bottom club Plymouth at the weekend, Scott. I know it's like the classic championship banana skin, but I don't think we saw it coming.
No, I have to admit I didn't really. Maybe should have done, given that obviously Sunderland didn't take the points down at Plymouth either back in September. But, I mean, you don't want to be too critical, do you? You know, the team has done really, really well this season. Regis Le Bris has been fantastic. He's clearly earned 1,000,001 passes in terms of what he's done for Sunderland so far. That said, I did think he got it wrong. I didn't think it was the right game to bring Samed in for. You know, I understand what he was saying after the game, that at some stage you've got to get him in. Sunderland are going to need him between now and the end of the season. You need to get him up to speed. You need to get him used to it. Yeah, fine. But a defensive midfielder at home to Plymouth, so you've got your back four, then you've got, you know, the first time Sunderland have had a naturally defensive midfielder, a kind of proper holding player, if you like, and you play him against the side that's at the bottom of the league in a game where you were always going to be dominating possession. You know, you weren't really going to be worried about what Plymouth were doing. You were really going to be worried about what you were going to create. That then meant Dan Neil moved further up the pitch, did okay, but has obviously been doing really well in the role that he had been in. Meant you had to take Chris Rigg out of the team. So I think you just lost a bit of energy and kind of verve there. Obviously, you went away from the two up front, left Mayenda out, brought Roberts back. Again, in isolation, I can kind of understand that. Get the ball out wide. You know, Roberts obviously has a goal threat in him. But Mayenda and Isadora looked so good together at Derby in the week. So yeah, I just felt that he got it wrong. That said, I also thought it was just an off day for a number of Sunderland players. I mean, defensively, that was kind of as sloppy as Sunderland have been for a long, long time. I thought Meffam had a bad game. Or Nine made mistakes too. So you know, defensively it wasn't great. Jobe Bellingham barely touched the ball for long periods for whatever reason. He just couldn't get into the game. So a lot of different factors. I think you just write it down as, you know, a disappointment, an opportunity missed. I mean, you know, as it's happened, Leeds and Burnley drew 0-0 last night in quite possibly the dullest football match I've ever seen in my life. And Sheffield United obviously threw points away as well. So points-wise, it's not a disaster in any, you know, way, shape or form. I guess it does feel like an opportunity missed with those sides slipping up. But listen, draw a line under it, move on. Big game coming up against Middlesbrough, and something for Le Bris to reflect on in terms of the formation and the fact that it maybe didn't work, particularly in a game at home where Sunderland were always going to have a fair bit of the ball.
We're recording this on Tuesday morning, so it obviously feels too early to look ahead in depth to that Borough game next week. We'll do another vid either the back end of this week or very early next week, deadline day morning, obviously the morning of the game, filling you in on where things are at transfer wise and looking ahead to that game on the night. Yeah, like you say there, it's that balance, isn't it, between, in one sense, you've got away with dropping points in a game like that because the others have, but then in the other, the kind of more pressing feeling, I think, is what a missed opportunity, what a chance that was to close the gap on the three above. Sorry. When you say the midfield there, it is one of Le Bris's big challenges in the second half of the season going to be not overcomplicating it, but how do you keep Bellingham, Neil, Rigg, Samed, Lafay, you've got Brown coming back as well. If they're all important, then how would you keep them all happy and get the best out of them and play them in the best positions? There's already questions about whether Lafay's been kind of wasted in a wide role. Neil has been excellent as a 6, hasn't he? So why push him forward? Clearly, Rigg and Bellingham, you know, I think we do kind of easily forget their age, and managing their game time is understandable, but it's a challenge, isn't it, in the coming months?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You know, when it was Rigg, Jobe, and Dan Neil, and pretty much nobody else, Sunderland were leaving themselves incredibly short and incredibly vulnerable if either of those had picked up a long-term injury. But on the flip side, if the three stayed fit, and to be fair, pretty much this season to a massive, large extent they have, then A, the team picked itself, and B, they were able to get into a real rhythm and a real groove and got used to the system, used to playing with each other. And I do think that midfield three and the way that they've played has been a big, big factor in Sunderland's success this season. Now, all of a sudden, like you say, you've got Le Fay in the mix, you've got Samed in the mix. At the minute, you're kind of solving it by playing Le Fay out wide, but what happens when Mundle's back? What happens when Tommy Watson's back? All of a sudden, you feel like you want one of them more natural left-sided attackers in there. So clearly, Le Fay doesn't play on the left anymore. So, yeah, it is going to be a challenge, this now, for Le Bris. He'll say, as all managers do, it's what you want. It's perfect. I want competition. I'd much rather that. Yeah, totally take that. But, there is sometimes something to be said for three players who all know they're going to play, all know where they're going to play, and just keep rolling from game to game to game. Some of them probably aren't going to have that in the second half of the season. So it is going to be a different dynamic. And I think probably key to that will end up being where Le Fay plays, because he already looks like he's going to be incredibly hard to leave out of that team. Looks like he will be at his best in probably a number 10 role rather than being out wide. What that then means for Jobe, Rig, Neil will be really interesting moving forward, I think.
Go on then. Let's push forward 6 weeks. Mundle and Watson are back. Everyone's fit and available. And that might not happen in the second half of the season. But let's pretend it is. What's your front six? Your midfield and attack?
I think it will be... So I think, okay, so let's say if Sunderland were playing a playoff final tomorrow and everyone was fit, what would I play? I would play Dan Neil at the base. I would play Jobe and Le Fay as your kind of attacking two almost 10s. I'd have Isidore through the middle. I'd have Mundle on the left. And I'd have Roberts or Rig on the right, depending on probably whether you wanted a winger or whether you wanted someone who would give you a bit more track and back and be a bit more solid and potentially come inside. I think of all the midfield mix, and it seems utterly ridiculous saying this, probably think Rig, to a slight extent, is going to be the one who probably loses most game time from Le Fay coming in and once Mundle gets fit. I think Mundle will start again once he's fit. Clearly, because he's now got massive competition, he's going to have to hit the ground running when he comes back, because he was an automatic pick for the first half of the season. But again, largely because there was nobody else to play there. Well, that's not the case now. There are options there. And also, I do accept that leaving that out is leaving Mayenda out at the minute, where there's certainly an argument that two up front works for Sunderland. But I think in a big game, Le Bris would go back to his, what seems to be his preferred formation, which is more of a 4-3-3. And I do think ultimately it'll be Bellingham and Le Fay in those two kind of creative number 10 roles.
You mentioned up front there, where are we at? Because obviously we're in the last 6 days of the window now, and it's gone quiet the last week or so.
Yeah.
Where are things on that front?
So there's a lot of different strands to this, isn't there? I mean, where are we at? Well, where we are is Sunderland are still looking to bring in a forward before the transfer window closes, but the type of forward that they want and probably the extent to which they feel they absolutely need one has shifted, I think, as the window's gone on. Now, why is that shifted? Well, it's largely shifted because Isidore and Mayenda have continued to play very well, and that then creates problems in terms of trying to bring a player in. Well, why? Well, I did a piece on this, I think, off the back of the weekend. I can't remember when it was, but if Wilson Isidore stays fit between now and the end of the season, he will be Regis Le Bris's number one forward. He's earned that right. He's played well enough. He's scored the goals. Yes, there was a disappointment at Burnley. He's bounced back from that. But ultimately, Wilson Isidore has led the line. He's shown that he is, a top-end championship striker. What's he on now? 9 goals. If he stays fit between now and the end of the season, he should get to 15. He might get towards 18, 20. He will lead the line. Eliza Mayenda has shown that A, he's a capable deputy for Isidore if Isidore was to get injured, and B, if there are games where Le Bris wants to go with a 2, he's perfectly well suited to that role and arguably is even better in that role. So if you're then looking to bring in a striker, well, what's that striker coming to do in the second half of the season? potentially, if Isidore and Mayenda stay fit and stay in reasonable form, they're probably coming to sit on the bench to provide cover. Well, any kind of top-class striker is not really going to be willing to do that. And Premier League clubs are going to be very unwilling to loan their talented youngsters to a club where they're looking and thinking, well, he might not play. Now, I know some fans, and I've had this from some fans on social media, and I get it. If you're a striker worth your salt, you look at what Sunderland have got and say, well, I back myself to be better than that. I back myself to get in the team. Yeah, fine. But if the choice is go to a team where straight away you're going to be the starting number 9 for the second half of the season, especially if it's a loan move where you've only got 3 months, then, I understand why potentially you might be reluctant to go to Sunderland now. I think the other side of it as well is, if Sunderland, let's say Sunderland had signed Tom Cannon, okay, we know they were looking at Cannon, they were looking at Brereton and Diaz. Cannon, yeah, perfectly good Championship striker. Is he a Premier League striker? Sunderland are hoping that they're going to be in the Premier League next season. If you spend, 10, 15 million on Tom Cannon now on a 4-year deal on what's going to be, certainly at the absolute higher end of what Sunderland are currently offering wage-wise, that's a big, big commitment. And you potentially then get saddled with a Championship striker in the Premier League. And I think that has to come into Sunderland's thinking now when, you are hoping you're going to make it to the Premier League. Now, I know, again, the argument is, well, there's no point thinking about the Premier League till you get there. Sign the players who can get you to the Premier League first, then worry about it. Yeah, fine. But in a PSR era, when every penny counts, all of this kind of stuff, I understand why there's a reluctance to saddle yourself with effectively a Championship striker in the Premier League. So now, with all of that, I also get the argument that Sunderland still only have 2 strikers. If one of them gets injured, they are in a really, really vulnerable position. So I still do think Sunderland will sign a forward between now and the end of the season. But I don't necessarily think it'll be an out-and-out number 9. In fact, Le Bris was, we asked him this at the press conference last week, and he pretty much said that. I'd much rather, I think, have a versatile forward who could potentially fill in a number of different positions to cover a number of different positions than an out-and-out number 9 who, without explicitly saying it, the inference was definitely, if Isidore stays fit, he's probably not going to play.
So will it be a loan, or will it be a kind of project type long-term signing?
I think either of those. I think, the indications are that Sunderland have options that would tick both of those boxes. I think what it is unlikely to be now is a Kiefer Moore from seasons gone by, a tried and tested Championship number 9 who just stands there and gets balls into the box and will score your goals potentially. I think it's unlikely to be that. I think it will either be, a Premier League loan signing or, more of a project. Now, that's not to say it will be an Abdullahi who, clearly is a long, long way away from the first team. I think there's an acceptance that if they're going to do that, then that is very much for the future. That's got nothing to do with this season. They need some support for this season. So it needs to be someone who's at a level where they're ready to go into the team if Wilson Isidore, God forbid, breaks his leg next week and is out for the rest of the season. So project signing, yeah, okay, but not in the sense that it's going to be someone completely untried. I think they know that will still then leave them vulnerable.
So you think someone will come in? What I was going to say was, would it be a disaster if Sunderland fans wake up on Tuesday morning and no forward player is signed before the deadline?
I don't think it would be the disaster that it was looking like it would be maybe a couple of months ago, but I think it would leave Sunderland in a vulnerable position. Yeah. You would then be keeping your fingers crossed that your 2 forwards stayed fit, because if they didn't, you're scrambling around at square pegs and round holes, and you're back to almost where you were in previous seasons, where a lack of a natural forward player cost Sunderland, dearly. So not a disaster, but only not a disaster if your key 2 players stay fit.
And where are we at with exits? Obviously, there's been, or lack of them. I mean, there's been fresh speculation of more interest in Jobe Bellingham by Leverkusen, the latest to be linked. But you wrote a piece earlier this week saying Sunderland fully expect Bellingham and their other assets to still be at the club beyond the deadline.
Yeah, that's exactly it. if Borussia Dortmund come in and decide they're going to suddenly bid 50 million, that's a completely different argument. But all signs are pointing to the fact that, well, no, Sunderland will be doing everything they possibly can to keep Bellingham, Rig, Neil, Patterson, Ballard, Hume, all of those players that we know there's been a degree of interest in, at least to the end of the season. Come the end of the season, if Sunderland haven't gone up, there is some massive questions to be asked then. Let's shelve them for now. In January, Sunderland absolutely do not want to sell anyone. Now, like I say, you've always got to throw in the possibility of an utterly ludicrous bid coming that you don't expect and that you just cannot turn down. Aside from that, and all indications, by the way, is that that's not going to happen. There's no suggestion. I know there was talk of Bayer Leverkusen over the weekend with Bellingham. Clearly, there's the ongoing situation with Borussia Dortmund, who, understandably know him inside out and will have an interest there. There's been talk of Ipswich. There's been talk of Palace. There's been talk of West Ham. Sunderland are not expecting any of those clubs to come with anything like the kind of money that would make them really have to make a decision. If they come with the kind of money that's being talked about in the past and that Sunderland have seen in the past from Palace, say, it'll be turned down. So I don't think any of the big players will go. Rooson's obviously already gone out the door. There'll be another 2 or 3 like that. We've talked about it on previous videos. Abdullah Bar, absolutely, he can go. Adil Al-Shish, if there's any kind of an offer that Sunderland think works, he can go. But in terms of the big players, the big names, no, I don't think so.
And obviously the attack has been the priority all month. But are there any other areas where Sunderland are risking leaving themselves short? Right back, there's no obvious cover for Trey Hume. Left back, obviously the injury to Adji Elise leaves Dennis Sirkin, although you've got Leo Hjelde who can cover there. But what are those areas that you think there might potentially...
I think in an ideal world, you'd like another fullback, wouldn't you? I mean, again, we did ask Le Bris on the defensive situation last week, off the back of Jensen Seelt coming back and playing 45 minutes for the under-21s. And he basically said, I've got 7 defenders. I've got 7 defenders for the 4 positions. So let me not forget any here. So you've got, obviously, the kind of 5 who are starting regularly at the minute. So you've got Sirkin, Hume, or 9, Meffen, Ballard. Then you've got Hjelde. Then you've now got Seelt. Now, clearly, 5 of them are really centre-halves. But Luke O'Nien can play as a fullback. Leo Hjelde can play as a fullback. Again, it's not ideal. But I think the thinking is a little bit like the striker, where, well, what type of player are you going to be bringing in at the minute? You're not going to be spending the kind of money on someone who's going to dislodge any of the current starting 4. Bringing in for cover, yeah, possibly. If there's a Premier League loan option that gets you through at the end of the season, doesn't saddle you with much money, yeah, maybe. But I don't think Sunderland want to make a permanent signing there, because, as I keep coming back to, the hope is that they're in the Premier League next season, in which case what you want then is completely different to what you either want or would be able to get now. So I don't think there's going to be a rush in that area, no. But, if the option comes for a short-term deal that potentially improves your cover there, maybe they'll look at it. But I'd be surprised if Sunderland were signing a permanent defender this month.
And just finally on transfers, often in the last week of the window, particularly in January, things get a little bit hectic and there's kind of out the blue signings and players become available who you weren't expecting to become available. But the point Le Bris has made again and again and again to both of us is there has to be the connection. There have to be the right fit. He strikes me as the type who absolutely won't bite on... Unless there's a Lafitte, someone who he knows and thinks, yeah, he is going to be the perfect fit. But he doesn't strike me as the type who'll take any unnecessary gambles, who'll make any risky panic signings in the last days of the window.
No, and to be fair, we saw with Lafitte that when a player like that came up, Sunderland moved quick and were pretty decisive and got the deal done, ahead of pretty strong competition. So, yeah, I wouldn't rule out if a forward player becomes available that is, kind of a level above what might have been talked about so far, and Le Bris says, yeah, absolutely, and Speakman thinks, okay, this can work. That Sunderland have the scope to make that happen. They're not hemmed in by FFP kind of situations. You know, the money is there if the right player is there. But you're absolutely right as well. It would have to be someone who has the potential, at least in the short term, to be better than what they've got. And like I say, Le Bris rates Isidore very, very highly. Or and rather, it would also have to be someone that you rightly say Le Bris is ready to back and is not going to come in and upset the apple cart. You know, I mean, look at Connolly. It was a no-risk deal. So I understand why Sunderland made it, but you get the impression, don't you, that within 2 or 3 weeks, Le Bris had decided, nah, that's not for me. That's not going to work. And, you know, yes, I know he made an odd start here and there, but the writing was on the wall there pretty early, wasn't it? Well, and that was a deal that Sunderland could afford to take a bit of a gamble on because it was very short term and very low cost. They're not going to be taking that kind of gamble on money on deals rather that ties their money up on 2-year deals, 3-year deals, 4-year deals.
Well, let's see how the next few days play out. As I say, we're gonna get together again at the start of next week on the morning of deadline day. Will anything have changed by then? We'll see, and obviously look ahead to the final hours and the game on the night, which we were talking about this last week, weren't we? Not very often you get games on deadline day and the final hours. No. It must be. I know transfers have changed now, and you know, head coaches have very minimal input really in the final hours of a transfer compared to what they might have done years ago. But it's still a strange dynamic, isn't it?
Yeah, and again, Le Bris was asked about this at the end of last week, and I, you know, like you say, he basically said, look, from the middle of this week onwards, it'll be a 2-track thing, really. I'll be focusing on the game and the club will be focused on transfers. And yes, I'll get involved. Yes, I'm sure they'll ask me. Yes, I'll know what's happening. But certainly from Friday onwards, my focus is on that Middlesbrough game because it's a really big one. And you know, transfers, you know, that'll move across to the club departments that are involved with that, blah, blah, blah. I guess because of the way that Sunderland is set up, it probably is easier for them to do that than a number of other clubs. It's kind of how they operate anyway. But yeah, you know, if you're trying to make a big money signing on the same night that you're playing a game against one of your promotion rivals from just down the road, then it's not ideal, is it?
Let's see how it plays out for both clubs. Well, as we said at the start, thanks for subscribing. If you haven't, then just tap the button beneath. If you're listening on your podcast platforms, then rate and review there as well. Get in touch if there's something you want us to discuss, and we'll be back next week to look ahead to the Derby game and to talk about the final hours of the transfer window. Take care.